ABC General Hospital spoilers reveal that Brick had always trusted his instincts more than any official report. More than any whispered rumor, more than any explanation offered by the people he cared about. Instinct had kept him alive in worlds where hesitation meant death, and instinct had never failed him. But lately his instincts were screaming at him, loud, urgent, relentless. Something was wrong with Carly and Jocelyn. Something deeper than the surface-level fear they attempted to hide behind tight smiles and vague reassurances. Their behavior had shifted, their movements were too precise, their reactions too controlled, and Brick could see the weight of secrets pulling at them like anchors strapped to their ribs. At first he tried to ignore it. Carly had been through hell before, and Jocelyn's life had always hovered too close to danger. But this time there was a different edge to their tension. A sharpness he recognized from people who had stepped into territories far darker than they were prepared to handle. The names Sidwell, Brennan, and Cullum kept surfacing in whispers and half-finished sentences. In accidental slips that Carly brushed off too quickly. Brick had not survived the underworld this long by missing patterns. And everything about the current pattern pointed toward a threat that Carly and Jocelyn were trying and failing to. Outrun. The more he watched, the more the pieces snapped together. Carly's evasive answers, Jocelyn's sudden disappearances, the quiet panic in their eyes whenever someone mentioned the WSB or classified cases. Brick felt the chill of realization settling deep into his bones. Carly and Jocelyn weren't just involved in something dangerous, they were involved with men who had already crossed. Lines that can never be uncrossed. Sidwell's hidden operations, Brennan's coded messages. Cullum's violent unpredictability, every strand of that tangled web was tightening around the two women Brick had sworn. In his own unspoken way to protect, he hated being kept in the dark, but more than that, he hated watching them drown under the weight of something they clearly couldn't control. Brick began investigating, silently drawing from networks that reached far beyond Port Charles. He read between lines, tracked conversations, followed digital shadows left behind by men who believed themselves untouchable. The more he uncovered, the clearer it became. Sidwell was not operating alone. Brennan had not been merely a mentor. And Cullum was far more dangerous alive than the world wanted to admit. And Carly and Jocelyn had somehow been pulled directly into the center of their war. Brick understood then that silence was no longer an option. He began preparing for control, a new kind of control, the kind that required him to step into the role of guardian, strategist and enforcer, all at once. He started adjusting his movements, recalibrating his routines, watching Carly and Jocelyn with the same scrutiny he once reserved for criminals. The situation demanded more than protection. It demanded intervention. And Brick, despite his calm demeanor, was already evolving into the man they needed, someone who could confront the truth without fear and rein in a growing disaster before it consumed them. But nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. Jocelyn disappeared. Carly tried to hide the panic, but Brick saw right through her. She shook, barely breathing, clinging to hope that felt thinner than air. Brick demanded answers, but Carly gave him fragments. Windermere Cullum, danger. A message from Brennan she never should have read. The truth hit Brick like a blow to the chest. Jocelyn wasn't just in trouble. She was trapped in the one place in Port Charles where secrets thrived and nightmares took shape. Windermere, a fortress of shadows perched on an island that swallowed screams. A place where too many people had entered and not enough had returned. Brick did not hesitate. He didn't wait for backup, didn't waste time on negotiations. He moved with brutal efficiency, fueled by a protective rage he rarely allowed himself to feel. The boat ride through the fog felt endless, but Brick kept his vision focused and his mind sharper than ever. He had one mission: get Jocelyn out alive. When he arrived, the castle felt alive with tension. Brick moved through hallways like a silent predator, reading every sign of recent struggle, the overturned chair, the faint drag marks, the discarded gloves stained with dirt from the rocky shoreline. And then he heard it, the faint echo of a desperate breath coming from behind a bolted door deep within the west wing. Jocelyn. Her voice was weak, strained, but unmistakably hers. Brick didn't waste a second. He tore through the lock with brute force, ripping metal from hinges, uncaring of the noise. When the door flew open, he found Jocelyn curled on the floor, bruised, terrified, and struggling to stay conscious. The relief that washed over him was so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees, but there was no time for emotion. He lifted her into his arms with a steadiness that contradicted the storm inside him. But while carrying her out of that room, while moving through Windermere's labyrinth with Jocelyn clinging weakly to his shoulder, Brick saw something, a file discarded on a table, half-burned, containing documents with Sidwell's name, Brennan's encrypted signature, and Cullum's classified operations. A secret. A secret Jocelyn never intended him to see. A secret capable of shattering everything. Brick snatched the file just seconds before a new wave of danger surged through the castle. He didn't know whether Cullum was returning or whether Brennan had set a trap, but he didn't hesitate. He escaped with Jocelyn, carrying her through corridors of darkness until they reached the shoreline, where he signaled for an extraction he hadn't planned but had always kept ready. Only when they reached safety did Brick truly understand the magnitude of what he had uncovered. Jocelyn had been part of a war far bigger than she realized. Carly had been hiding far more than she admitted, and Sidwell, Brennan, and Cullum were all connected by a chain of operations that could rewrite everything Port Charles believed about the WSB. Brick realized then that he wasn't just a protector anymore. He was now the keeper of a secret that could destroy lives, topple alliances, and expose truths that powerful men had killed to hide. And Jocelyn, trembling in his arms, whispered one sentence that confirmed everything. The real danger hadn't even started yet. Brick had handled secrets his entire life, classified files, encrypted messages, untraceable movements, but nothing had prepared him for the insane truth he now held in his hands. The discovery at Windermere had been only the beginning. Once he rescued Jocelyn and escaped into the fog-covered shoreline, the pieces of the puzzle began rearranging themselves in ways that made even Brick question the stability of the world he operated in. The documents he recovered were not simply records of Sidwell's operations or Brennan's encrypted signals. They hinted at something far bigger, far darker, a shadow program that Cullum had been overseeing long before anyone realized he was more than a rogue operative. Brick sifted through the evidence with the precision of a surgeon, isolating connections, decoding fragments, and piecing together a narrative that was so shocking, so unhinged, that he wasn't sure Sonny or Jason would believe it without proof. But Brick didn't rely on belief. He relied on facts, and the facts he gathered formed a story that could shift the entire balance of power in Port Charles. This was no longer about protecting Carly or rescuing Jocelyn. This was about preventing an unseen force from taking over the city. In the quiet hours after the rescue, when Jocelyn finally slept and Carly tried and failed to hide the trembling in her hands, Brick began collecting more evidence. He retraced Cullum's communications, infiltrated Sidwell's hidden channels, and accessed Brendan's abandoned operations logs. Every new discovery confirmed the same terrifying truth. Sidwell and Brennan had been working under orders that originated far outside the WSB's jurisdiction. They weren't rogue, they were obedient. Someone higher than anyone expected had orchestrated a program designed to manipulate pressure points across Port Charles, Sonny's empire, Jason's silence, Carly's vulnerability, and Jocelyn's impulsiveness. And Cullum, he was the failsafe, the one sent to clean what could not be controlled. Brick felt the cold weight of the truth settle into his chest. He wasn't simply holding evidence anymore. He was holding a detonator. As he gathered the final pieces, his mind sharpened with a clarity he rarely allowed himself to feel. If Sonny and Jason could see what he was seeing, if they understood the magnitude of what was forming beneath the surface, they would finally regain the power that the WSB had been trying to strip from them for years. Brick wasn't just building a case. He was building a new foundation, one that could return control to the people who actually knew how to wield it. For the first time in a long time, the balance of power was shifting back towards Sonny and Jason. But the deeper he dug, the more he realized something else. Carly and Jocelyn were involved far more deeply than anyone understood. Not because they wanted to be, but because Sidwell and Brennan had engineered the entire situation with ruthless precision. Carly's involvement had been predicted. Jocelyn's reaction had been anticipated. They had been used as pawns, emotional pressure points designed to destabilize Sonny and force Jason out of hiding. What looked like chaos was actually a meticulously constructed trap, and Brick had walked straight into the core of it. He watched Carly closely in the days that followed, observing how she flinched at shadows, how her eyes darted toward doors she never used to pay attention to. Jocelyn tried to act strong, but the trauma of Windermere clung to her like smoke. Brick recognized the signs, not just fear, but intrusion. Sidwell had left marks on them that weren't physical. That realization fueled Brick's resolve even more fiercely. Protecting them was no longer optional, it was essential. What haunted him, though, was how far things had already gone. The situation wasn't spiraling, it had already spiraled. The madness of the secrets he uncovered wasn't merely theoretical, it was manifesting in the real world, twisting events into shapes no one could predict. There was a new kind of obsession weaving through the city, one that distorted logic and burned through reason like a wildfire. It consumed everything it touched, Sonny's fragile calm, Jason's quiet discipline, Carly's normally unshakable strength, Jocelyn's increasingly reckless fear. And Brick was the only one who understood the scope of what was building. When he finally arranged a meeting with Sonny and Jason, he expected tension. He expected anger. He expected disapproval. What he didn't expect was the sheer shock that swept across their faces as he laid out the evidence piece by piece. The room fell silent in a way that made the air feel heavier, as though the walls themselves understood the enormity of the truth. First came the disbelief, then the realization, and finally the fear. Sonny leaned back slowly, processing every detail with the meticulous aggression of a man who had spent decades ruling a world built on secrets. Jason listened without moving, but Brick could see the calculation behind his stillness. the shift in his eyes as he pieced together the implications. Brick didn't sugarcoat anything. He told them about the codes Brennan used, the off-grid network Sidwell accessed, the contingency orders tied to Cullum, and the encrypted directive that had placed Carly and Jocelyn directly in the line of fire. He showed them the documents, the hidden communications, the failed operations that had been disguised as accidents. He showed them how deeply the corruption ran, how much of their lives had been manipulated without their knowledge. And when he finished, the silence that followed was more intense than any gunshot. Sonny finally exhaled his voice, low shaken, transformed by the weight of betrayal. Jason's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in something far sharper recognition. They understood now that the danger wasn't external. It had been inside their world all along, disguised as allies, mentors, and ghosts from the past. The shock in their eyes confirmed everything Brick had feared, but it also confirmed everything he had hoped for. With this information, Sonny and Jason could regain control. They could strike back. They could rewrite the power structure that Sidwell, Brennan, and Cullum had tried to corrupt. But more importantly, they could finally protect Carly and Jocelyn from the storm that was still gathering. As Brick closed the final file and placed it between them, he knew the truth had changed the game entirely. And the most chilling part, this was only the beginning of the madness he had uncovered. Brick could feel the momentum shifting around him, not in loud explosions or violent confrontations, but in the quiet, calculated way power always begins to rearrange itself before anyone else notices. The secrets he uncovered about Sidwell, Brennan, and Cullum were no longer just pieces of a chaotic conspiracy. They had transformed into a blueprint of influence that only he understood, a weapon disguised as knowledge, waiting for the right moment to be used. For years, Brick had operated as the quiet force behind Sonny and Jason, the one who saw what others overlooked. But now he held something far more valuable than intelligence reports. He held the ability to reshape the entire narrative of who controlled Port Charles. As he sorted through coded transmissions, hidden operations, and the strange patterns connecting every step the three men took, Brick realized he was standing at the threshold of a new realm of control, one in which he was no longer the advisor but the architect. This shift came at a strange time, because Carly and Jocelyn were spiraling deeper into the madness left behind by Cullum's unfinished plans, drawing attention, chaos, and danger straight into Sonny's orbit. Their involvement, emotional and unpredictable, threatened to push everything past the point of recovery. And Brick knew that if he didn't intervene soon, the conspiracy would ignite in a way none of them could contain. Yet even as he worked to stabilize the situation, another thought kept echoing through his mind: Jordan. She had always been sharp, resilient, and impossible to intimidate, but now without realizing it, she stood dangerously close to the edges of the secrets Brick had uncovered. Her investigations were leading her toward the same shadows he was navigating, and every move she made drew her closer to a truth that could swallow her whole if she stepped into it blindly. Brick never allowed personal feelings to interfere with strategy, but the more he watched Jordan work, the more he felt the weight of a responsibility that went deeper than duty. Somewhere in the middle of decoding encrypted files and tracing the remains of Brennan's compromised network, Brick understood that he didn't just want to protect Jordan, he wanted to be the one she trusted when everything finally collapsed. That desire, unexpected, steady, undeniable, became part of his new calculation. He began gathering pieces of evidence not only to reinforce Sonny and Jason's dominance, but to create a parallel path that would allow Jordan to step into the truth safely, guided by him rather than blindsided by the brutality of what Sidwell had built. It wasn't manipulation, it was preparation. A way of crafting a future where Jordan wouldn't have to face the storm alone. Brick started shaping the information into tiers of strategy, constructing a narrative that would strengthen Sonny's foothold, sharpen Jason's instincts, and silently shield Jordan from the parts of the conspiracy that could break her. With every step he took, Brick felt the gravity of his position growing heavier, but instead of fear, he felt clarity. The power he was gathering didn't corrupt him, it focused him. It gave him purpose. Carly and Jocelyn's escalating recklessness only reinforced how urgent his role had become. Jocelyn was emotionally unstable, after Windermere terrified but stubborn, and Carly was trying to protect her while hiding more than she should. Their panic pushed them closer to exposing Sidwell's leftover operations, and Brick knew that one wrong confession, one poorly timed emotional outburst could unravel the entire strategy he was building. This wasn't a simple case of damage control anymore, it was a battle of architecture. A war fought in silence and information, and Brick was the only one with a full map of the battlefield. As he assembled the last layers of his evidence, he realized that Sonny and Jason would soon understand the depth of his work. They would see the patterns he uncovered, the danger he had predicted, and the opportunities he had crafted. But they would also see something else, Brick himself changing. He was no longer the man behind the curtain, he was becoming the force holding every thread of the situation together. When the moment came to present the information to Sonny and Jason, he would do so not as their support, but as their equal. A partner whose insight had saved them from a war that had nearly reached their doorstep without warning. And Jordan, whether she knew it or not, was part of that evolution. Brick planned to approach her not with manipulation, but with honesty, with the readiness to show her the pieces of the truth she needed in order to survive what was coming. He had never fought for a woman before, not like this, but the more he stepped into his new position of control, the more he understood that power meant nothing if he couldn't use it to protect the people who mattered. As the final puzzle pieces clicked into place, Brick felt a strange calm spread through him. The old order was shifting. A new version of the city's power structure was forming. And at the center of it all stood Brick, a man ready to rewrite the story, defend the future, and claim a connection with Jordan that he had kept buried in silence for far too long. The change had already begun, irreversible and unstoppable. And Brick was prepared to step fully into the new world he had just forged from Shadow's strategy, and secrets no one else could carry.